we're going to take a look at the early 20th century in two really important places across the globe. Today, we're going to look at China, and then we'll examine India in the subsequent day here in the interwar period. And why we want to be able to do so is because of the importance of both China and India today. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the present and also some of the past here, and you're going to need to use some of this material for the questions that you're going to answer later on here. But again, the importance for today is the following. The first of which is that China today is one of the most key, important economies in the globe. And if we use a measure called price purchasing parity, which is kind of like GDP, we're going to find that the European and United States have two of the biggest economies in the world, but subsequently following those two are China, Japan, and India, and all of which are growing at a rapid pace. Right. Not only that, but we have immensely large populations in both states. China is up to about 1.4 billion, and by 2050, we estimate almost 1.5 billion Chinese in China, and in India, 1.23 billion today, and it will exceed China by 2050. At least that's what the projections lay out. But neither are these countries just simply weak states that are developing sort of the little things of the world here. In fact, both states are creating and have a large number of science and technology graduates, and they're graduating a lot of engineers per day. Whereas if we're looking at the United States, we're looking at about 70,000 engineers that we graduate each year. In India, we're looking at 350,000, in China about 600,000 engineers. Okay? And so they are really your competitors in the new global market. And it's important to look at these growing powers in the 21st century and how they are affected. Okay? We also want to look at and examine the historical background for each of these states as well. Okay? And part of the East, at least from the perspective of Western Europe, is that this is the place where you went to seek goods and to obtain the most priceless items across the globe, whether it's Chinese silks, Indian cloth, and so forth. Okay? But from there are some big differences between the two states. Okay? India is a region of immense diversity, the homeland and the birthplace of some of the major religions across the globe, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism, and a large number of Muslim adherents as well, but immense diversity in terms of religion, class, and ethnic identity as well. Historically, however, it's been one of the more decentralized, meaning there are very few times in Indian history where they were united by a single empire. In opposite of this is Imperial China, where they have created for themselves one of the longest lasting unified groups of people in human history. So much so that this entire region has been seen as Chinese for the longest time, rather than if we look at Europe, where there are dozens of different national and ethnic identities. In China, you could have the same amount, but the notion of being Chinese, and particularly Han Chinese, is the identity that we associate most with in China. And not only that, but it has a long-standing government system whereby for the last 2,000 plus years, China, throughout most of its history, has been ruled by a powerful emperor and one of the most organized bureaucracies. In other words, they are one of the first societies that chose the most talented individuals to become government officials, and you would actually have to even take a test and obtain a high score in order to get these particular positions. Okay? And so two of the wealthiest, most powerful regions in the world, by the 19th century, has reached a point whereby they both of them have weakened. Okay? And much of this has to do with using Western power for the first time to obtain the desired goods from the East. Things like Chinese silks. Chinese silks, we have what we call vases and other porcelain goods. For us, now just simply known as fine china. And not only that, particular goods. And for the British, what they're looking for are things like tea, for instance. Okay? And so the tea trade and really eventually the tea obsession is going to lead Britain to enhance or to try to grow their trade in China. But it would not be that easy because there's nothing necessarily that the West is producing that the Chinese actually wanted. And so as a result of this, the British particularly needed to find something else for themselves to be able to trade to China. And as it turns out, that trade happens to be illicit and illegal drugs. This drug called opium, which is a hallucinogen, which means that in China, this is consumed, it's grown from poppies, by the way. It's something that it's usually consumed through smoking, but it's something that just knocks you out. And you're imagining all this crazy stuff. But what it does, if you're a working individual, it keeps you from working. And as the addiction will grow in China, as the British will end up smuggling these drugs into China, receive silver as a result, and using that silver to purchase tea and other materials, southern China is going to struggle immensely. And so as a result of this, China figured that it had had enough, and so it ended up declaring war on Great Britain, leading to what is known as the Opium Wars. However, this is a war that China could not win because of the new industrial power that Great Britain was. And so as a result of this, what was passed were a series of what we call unequal treaties, whereby China was forced to succumb to a number of issues. The first of which would be the opening of further ports, whereas there was only a single port where British traders could come in. Now all of a sudden there were so many more. Not only that, but there were missionaries that came into China, and as a result of missionary work, there was some miscommunication, and it actually ended up leading to an enormous rebellion in southern China that lasted over a decade. And because China was losing all of these wars, it tried to industrialize as quickly as it possibly could. And in the late 19th century, they started what is called a self-strengthening movement to try to bring in Western industries, weaponry, and so forth. But the problem was, and especially when it was put to the test, when the new Chinese military was put to the test in a war against Japan over the region of Korea, the Chinese end up losing. And there was a counter-revolution to this, what is known as the Boxer Uprising of right at the turn of the century, whereby there was a small group of individuals that would attack Westerners, and this became an anti-Western, anti-industrial event, whereby really gangs of people started to come out and to find any Westerners they possibly could. And because it was Europeans and Americans that were being attacked, a joint army was sent into China, both the Americans, Germans, British, French, and even Japanese, that were sent into China to stop this particular rebellion. But by the 20th century, the most powerful state in the world throughout human history was weakened to the point of civil war, and leading to the 1911 revolution that finally overthrew this 2,000-year imperial system. And they're going to try as best they can to create a new modern China in the Western sense. And so under the guidance of a Western educated doctor by the name of Sun Yat-sen, and also by the pressures made by students in what is known as the May 4th movement. Now this movement is associated with the end of the First World War. China had actually joined the side of the Allies, and hoping that they would actually gain something from the war, they didn't. In fact, they ended up losing some territories to Japan. And so as a result of this student movement was hoping to try to create and establish a new modern Chinese society in the likeness of Western society. In other words, democracy and capitalism over traditions like Confucianism and others. A political party was created by Dr. Sun Yat-sen and other students and other Western-oriented leaders. They created this political party called the Nationalists. Okay? And throughout the 1910s and 1920s, they sought to end the civil war in China, where you had all these competing ideologies and competing warlords who are fighting over who would lead China. Now, Sun Yat-sen will pass away in the early 1920s, but his key disciple, a man by the name of Jiang Jieshi, will become the leader of the Nationalists, and he will start to reunify China together into a single entity. However, there was a particular wing of his political party, known as the Communists, who would actually help them to unify China. But seeing that this particular group would become a major challenge, particularly a challenge to the nationalists, he turns against them. And so Jiang in 1927 ends up attacking every single communist that he could find, forcing the communists, who is an urban working class group, to flee into the countryside. And at this point, one of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, a man by the name of Mao Zedong, is going to find himself in the countryside and will find himself with new allies. And so we're going to take a look at this particular document today, called The Peasants of Hunan. And in this, Mao is going to find a new and a different vision of communism, one that is different than the one that's being established in the Soviet Union. So you're going to go ahead and take a look at this document, and you're going to answer the discussion questions that are laid out for you in that Google Doc. And so there are 6 questions for you to answer. And some of what we've just gone through in the lecture help you to answer question 1 there. So as a new vision of China is being established, they are still being pursued by the Jiang Jieshi and the nationalists. And so many of these communists are going to find themselves fleeing for their lives. And they end up on this 1,000+ mile journey, running away from the nationalists and their army, and going across China and meeting groups of peasants all across China. And as it turns out, this potential disaster is going to be quite beneficial for the growth of the Communist Party in China as well. And if I can provide it for you, there's also an optional video that you can go and take a look at called The Incredible March, or what is known as eventually in history as the Long March in 1934 to 1935 and 1936. All right, guys, go ahead and take a look at the document. Thanks for your attention.